Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Analyzing the KM Achievement Gap, being presented by iKnow's Engagement Director and KM Specialist, Simon Trussler. As the foremost authority in benchmarking best practices, process and performance improvement, and knowledge management, APQC is pleased to bring you stories from leading-edge organizations like iKnow LLC. iKnow was the exclusive sponsor of APQC's 2017 KM conference that happened this past April, and this presentation was one of the highest rated sessions from the conference. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. All lines are in listen-only mode, but feel free to enter your questions at any time in the Q&A window at the right of your screen. We will address as many questions as possible during today's presentation. You will also receive a follow-up email no later than this coming Monday with links to the slides and the recording from today's webinar. And finally, we will be live tweeting today's webinar, so join in the conversation using the hashtag KMAPQC. Now, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Simon Trussler. Simon has over 30 years of consulting and project management experience and has extensive global functional management experience in KM, research services, and training functions. Simon, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Zakia.
There. I'm sorry, I'm passing over control right now, Simon, and you should be good to go.
Okay, I double-click, right? Great, thank you, Zakia. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about this with a wider audience than we had at the conference in Houston. So welcome along, and I hope you get a lot out of this session. As Zakia indicated, I've had the opportunity and the good fortune to launch and manage several enterprise-wide KM programs over the last 20 years or so. So what you're going to see is kind of partly a personal thing. It's informed by definitely by the KM literature and by experience of others, but it's also a personal view of some of the opportunities and hazards involved in running KM programs and getting the most out of them, and things that I found to be particularly important. My colleague from iKnow, Bob Armacost, is also on the panel here, and he'll jump in every now and then when he thinks I've missed something or to add additional perspective. He has very similar experience to me in terms of KM program launch and management, so I think he'll have good perspectives as well. So I'm assuming a lot of the audience today are KM practitioners or leaders of some sort, or would-be practitioners maybe, but I hope a lot of the ideas here are relevant to general executives trying to understand and evaluate KM programs as well. So as part of what I say will be pitched to the practitioners, but please take it as more general than that, and as Zakia said, we're happy to answer questions via the chat. I'll pause every now and then to collect those and answer them, and if you have more general questions, happy to dive into those as well. So let's get going. The underlying theme here is, are you getting the most out of your knowledge management? And by now, most leading organizations have developed some sort of enterprise knowledge management capability. I think it's true to say, though, that many of them have periods at least, or sometimes long periods, where the momentum drops off, even quite dramatically, after the initial enthusiasm for knowledge management wears off. So question is, why is that, and what can be done about it, and how can we close that achievement gap? I think part of this is true of any corporate program, and you're all familiar with other corporate initiatives that have been launched with a big fanfare and then kind of fizzle for a while, and KM's no exception to that. And I want to talk about two key themes today in terms of this issue. One is getting true business buy-in, executive business buy-in to the knowledge management program, how you can facilitate that and make that happen. And then secondly is taking a business view kind of downwards into the detail of your program and running the kind of diagnostics and analyses that you would for any other business problem to try and get at the root causes of why it's not as successful or as sustained as you'd like it to be. So that's some of the themes we'll discuss today. So these danger signs are things that crop up when the program is losing momentum, and you may have seen one or more of these. There's too much to look through on the knowledge system or an enterprise search. I can't find what I really need. It's starting to feel like a burden to populate and maintain the system. Of course, that one depends partly on how decentralized a process you have for doing that. But regardless, the people who are maintaining or improving the system may start to complain about the burden and the routine of it. And perhaps the most frustrating one for a KM leader is people going around the system after you've spent all this time and effort building a knowledge system so people can find out what's been done before and learn from it. You still see all staff emails saying, has anybody seen this issue before? And that kind of makes you tear your hair out, because they're not using the system that you've probably expensively and with a lot of time and effort built to answer those kind of questions. So anytime you see any or all of these kind of quotes coming through the organization, it's a danger sign, and obviously also just declining participation and usage over time is something you don't want to see either. Allied to that, you might get broader negative rumblings from general executives, and just doing a search here on KM failure, just for the fun of it, you get a large number of hits here. Even if you put it in quotes like a good information scientist, you still get 3,000 hits on KM failure on Google, and a lot of bad stories about programs failing. So there's some negative buzz around the industry and the area, which needs to be borne in mind when you're communicating about it, and needs to be counteracted with the good stories. I mentioned here the piece by Tom Davenport, which was in the Wall Street Journal and LinkedIn actually a couple of years ago, which is actually a very worthwhile read if you haven't seen it. It's a little negative, and I think it's just designed to be provocative, so take it in that spirit. But he said, one of the quotes from that is, KM's a great idea, but it's too hard for all but the most passionate, which is a little negative way of putting it, but I think the theme of passion and really getting people behind it in an enthusiastic way is something I'm going to return to in this presentation. So some of those road bumps you see are normal for any organizational initiative, as we already mentioned, and this is from an old colleague of mine, Jeannie Duck at the Boston Consulting Group. She wrote a very good book on change management called The Change Monster, and it's talking about the stages of a change management program when you launch a corporate initiative. And without going into the details here, you can see the trend, which you're probably familiar with. There's a period when you decide to change, there's preparation for that, there's implementation with a lot of enthusiasm, and then awareness that something's wrong, chaos and conflicts and crises after that, until you manage to turn it around and finally realize the results. So this is a sort of a normal cycle that people go through, and need to be kind of prepared for this in managing KM programs. So some of her solutions are about addressing the real business and behavioral issues that are hindering your initiatives, engaging all the right people, and we'll talk about leadership support in a minute, and keeping up positive and honest communication, but the same as you had when you started the program, maintaining that over time. So there's lots of good general themes of change management here that definitely apply to KM as well. Some of it may also be specific things that are more related to knowledge management as a business theme. You may have had changes in the priority business processes that mean a lot to the business over time. You may have had changes in available sources and tools that power your KM system. And you may have had changes in culture and behavior too, perhaps after acquisitions or mergers or change of leadership or something like that. So being alert to those business-specific signals also is important and can lead you to think about KM renewal. So that's some of the background. And launching into the two themes I was talking about, the starting premise here is that knowledge management will never really take off in your organization unless the business leaders passionately support it in their everyday work. So back to that theme of passion. And as KM leaders, I've found through long experience of this that you need to make sure that this happens. It's not going to necessarily happen on its own. Sometimes it will if there's an immediate business need for, say, best practices sharing or some other aspect of knowledge management. It may kind of happen on its own, but certainly to sustain it and to apply it in an organization where there's dozens of important business issues, and this is just one of them, then you as the KM leader have to work to make sure that this remains on the business leader's agenda and that they do passionately support it. The other way of looking at this, you can't do it on your own in the KM leadership team. You have to manage both up and downwards. And the down part you'll be familiar with is optimizing the plumbing of knowledge management. So making sure the systems work correctly, that they do what they're supposed to do, that the roles are defined right, that the governance is defined right. So knowledge capture and knowledge curation happens properly and works well. So all of that we'll talk about a bit later, but that's what I call the plumbing here. Not meaning to be disrespectful, because that's critical work, but that's the operational side of the role. But then there's this other side that I think is often a little underemphasized, which is really taking the CEO view of KM, or the senior leadership team view of KM, if you want to be a bit broader, and managing up to initiate and maintain that true view. Why should the CEO care about this initiative amongst the dozens of other things on their plate? And perhaps more to the point, what can he or she really do about it? And what's their role in making it work? And how can you engage them in doing that? So to do that, you really need to take a truly business-based view, or if you're a public or non-profit organization, it's a mission-based view. It comes to the same thing of why you're doing knowledge management, why it adds value to the organization, and why that's important for the leadership team. So you need really solid tools to do both the managing up and the managing down, and that's what we'll talk about in the rest of this presentation. We'll look at some concrete techniques for doing both things. So first thing is, well, I don't know, maybe we should pause there for a second. Are there any questions on this intro, Zakia?
No, Simon, not at this moment. I want to remind the audience that they can enter their questions in the Q&A feature, and then we'll address them as they come in.
Very good. Okay, we'll press on. Let's talk about the managing up section to start with. So as we said, I think this is about putting yourself in the CEO's position, or the senior leadership team's position. And this is what you might hear. I'd like this to work in my organization. Intuitively, I feel it's important. My people have a lot of good ideas which I need to spread around. Our business performance does vary across units, and I'm aware of that, so I know there must be learning opportunities. One unit can learn from another. There are lessons learned, there are best practices, there are themes that some people have seen before and others are just learning. And I don't want people wasting time reinventing the wheel. So almost everything we face as a business or as a non-profit or a public organization, almost everything we face, somebody must have seen it before in some form. And that's the core business case for knowledge management. Somebody must have done this before. So we're wasting time and money and energy if we reinvent the wheel. So that's the business case for initiating it, but what about if it's already going and the leadership is aware that it's going, but something's missing? People are complaining about the IT platform that you've built to do knowledge management. Some people are pulling their weight in terms of contributions and curation and teaching and learning, and others aren't. And maybe just I can't see clear results from all this. I'm aware it looks good, but maybe people are saying good things about it, but I can't really see the business value. And now you're asking me to invest more in it, maybe in money or maybe just in senior resource and people. So to buy into that, I really need a business case and a credible plan of action. I think having this conversation can be quite difficult for KM leaders and staff if they're not closely tied to the business and to the senior executives' concerns. And sometimes I found that the longer your knowledge management function has been in operation, has been up and running, the more likely it can be that it's morphed into a back office function without you intending it to, but it's just a natural evolution because you get so preoccupied with the mechanics and operations of it that you might lose that executive business focus quite unintentionally, even if you started everything in the front office. So I think we really, as practitioners, we need to fight against that tendency and continue to engage business leaders, find sponsors, and really put yourself in the CEO's shoes. So you may think that's all about ROI analysis, and I'm not against ROI, but if you'll forgive the expression, I wouldn't want to overinvest in it, in the I part of it, because it's definitely of some use, but sometimes I think people go to too much trouble to try and prove something that's quite hard to prove in a truly persuasive way, the way you might prove the business case for an acquisition or something. There's a lot of softer stuff in here that makes that analysis good in a back of the envelope way of doing things, but I wouldn't put too much time into it. There are measurement issues and there are credibility issues with what you measure. So instead, we would advocate a mixture of the high-level ROI, but with a more qualitative approach too, in terms of showing what happens when KM isn't there in an organization, and that goes, of course, with specific examples of success and impact. So focusing on how KM solves real and acknowledged business problems, and we'll talk about some techniques for that right now. That seems like a good approach to go along with a high-level ROI. So the sort of thing we're thinking about in terms of qualitative measures is how does poor knowledge management limit your business performance? And it shouldn't be hard to gather stories on this kind of thing. We couldn't pull together our qualifications quickly enough for this request for proposal. How's that other company delivering so much faster than us? And maybe less obvious ones, like we weren't prepared for that meeting that we just had. This actually came up with a client of mine last year where they actually had as part of their business, they had a lot of international high-level meetings, and they really needed very good knowledge management in terms of prior discussions with the same people, prior discussions on the same topics with other people, and more than you'd think to get the most out of those meetings. And it's kind of a point solution, but it's really important for that organization. Or maybe it's methodological, like we didn't know about that calculation technique. That would have saved us several days if we'd known that when we were doing this analysis. Or in R&D, we wouldn't have run that trial if we'd known about the previous one. So all of that leads to missed opportunities, to wasted time and money, sometimes to reduced quality or safety, and nearly always to employee frustration, because there's nothing more frustrating than spending a long time on something and finding somebody else had done it and you could have done it in a tenth of the time. The more systematic way of doing all this is to do something like the APQC's process knowledge mapping framework. So here's my APQC story. This is very useful, this framework of really listing different business processes that are important and then thinking about what knowledge is needed for each activity within that process. Who owns the knowledge? Where is the knowledge today? Who validates it, and how do you get to it, and how big's the knowledge gap? So working through that systematically for business processes that are strategically important, we found to be a very, very powerful way of, number one, making the business case for knowledge management in general, but number two, getting tactical about which parts have the highest leverage and the highest impact if we can solve them. So very, very important set of tools around this, which you can find on the APQC's website. The other approach, I like this one very much. It's from a couple of UK-based consultants who've, Chris Collison and Jeff Parcell, who used to work at BP. And they have this thing called the river diagram. The way this works is you, along the bottom axis there, you have a number of dimensions of performance, of business performance. The 5 here are fairly general, but there could be more specific things like factory throughput time or time to change stock in a retail store or anything like that. And all you do here is plot the best and the worst internal benchmarks on each of those dimensions. And that defines the blue area here. So the top of the blue area is the best performer. And it's just a qualitative level system here. You could make it quantitative if you wanted. But the top is the best and the bottom is the worst. So the width of the river here on each dimension tells you, in a way, the opportunity for knowledge management, because it's saying this is the divergence between my best and worst performers on this dimension. So in principle, by using knowledge management, I ought to help the worst learn from the best and close the width of that river. The other thing is that in terms of the absolute height of the blue, it tells you which areas are just not doing very well, even from the point of view of the best. So that might indicate you need more idea generation or you need more external benchmarking to make that work well. So a very simple diagram, but I think it's quite powerful on making the business case and focusing the effort on the areas with highest impact. The final thing would be linking it explicitly to vision and strategy, and this is from a client we had which is in the renewable energy business, and they had a medium-term vision to produce a certain amount of renewable energy over the next 20 years, building world-class research and technology capabilities to enable that, and that led to some concrete strategic goals, which is all part of their strategy plan, and you can pretty easily translate those into KM and content management goals. So in this case, it's all about internal capability building of the kind of thing we were just talking about. So R&D, investment approaches, partner information. For them, it's very important to have smart and rapid access to external news as well as internal, and we treat that as part of KM. And finally, very effective enterprise-wide training and collaboration, because there's a lot of scope for collaboration and knowledge sharing in the different functional areas that make up this business. So just making that translation from vision, strategy, down to the nuts and bolts of how knowledge really drives that, it kind of partners the river chart and the process mapping to give you, between the three of them, I think a very powerful business case for KM and business focus for KM. So let me stop there. Any questions at this point, Zakia? Or anything you'd like to add, Bob?
Bob, you can go ahead. We'd love to hear your insight. I think we have a couple of questions that I'll hold in the hopper for when we get towards the end of this presentation, because I think you're going to get into some of this.
Okay. Oh, Bob may have dropped off. Okay, shall I press ahead, Zakia?
Go for it.
Here we go. So, if all this is so important, why isn't KM working? So why do we have the achievement gap? And what are the levers we can pull to improve things? And let's talk about that in terms of really the two things we talked about up front, the managing up and managing down. So on the managing up side, you've got a bunch of leadership levers, things you want the leaders of the organization to do to support KM. And we'll talk about those three in a minute, but it's about, actually let me come to them in a minute rather than going through them here, but you can see them on the chart. They're about behavior and behavior of executives and team members and the role of leadership in encouraging the right behaviors and changing behavior. And then the second group is the levers for the KM team, and this is the managing down part, the optimization of the plumbing. And there are obviously lots and lots of things here, but these are three that we found particularly important in many knowledge management situations and things that are analyzable and fixable with good diagnostics. So we'll talk about those as we come to them. So on the executive team side, the three things that I wanted to focus on are, number one, disseminating this attitude throughout the leadership team of ask before reinventing. So it kind of needs to become unacceptable for teams to reinvent the wheel, and that's a leadership task to communicate that message and to try to follow up on that message to make sure it doesn't slip back. So it's actively, it's as simple as maybe staying in a team meeting at just after the start of a new project. Who are you going to ask about the issues on this project? And then a couple of weeks later, did you ask them and what was the answer and was it helpful? So it's very simple things, just communicating that asking others is important for you as a leader, and it's important that your team does that, that it's not acceptable to reinvent without asking, that it's a good thing to borrow from others, you're borrowing with pride rather than with shame, and it's important to find new sources and analogies for problems, to think creatively about not just who might have done the exact thing before, but who might have done something similar or analogous before. And there's dozens of business examples of this where people took ideas from one business and applied them to another, and yet you can all think of those. Second thing, and it sort of goes together with that, is being proactive about dissemination. And this means not only do I ask before reinventing, but I take what I've learned and proactively tell others about that. So in a sense, some of them don't even have to ask in future because it's out there. So that's taking the key lessons from a project or an initiative or a task and using really all channels, online and live channels, whatever makes sense in the context of your organization, to communicate those lessons learned, and essentially asking the question throughout a project, what are we doing that could be useful to other teams or to others in the organization? So forcing that question to be asked is another, it's something everybody can do, but it's very helpful if the leadership and the executive team constantly reinforce and do that themselves. It's going to become hopefully a habit within the organization, and the groups that do it well will gain a reputation for being helpful, and that will be self-perpetuating, hopefully. Then the third thing is about curation, and that's about, as a leader, making sure that my teams are investing in the priority knowledge. Sort of links to the previous one in a way, because by disseminating you might be doing that, but it goes broader than that, because it's really about the content strategy for the whole business. What content is it important for my team to package up and disseminate to others, to curate in a sense that it's really useful to other teams and that it's not just something individual. And as a leader, I need to have the people and the resources to actually do that and to execute on it. It doesn't have to be a huge level of resource, as you know, but somebody needs to be thinking about that and planning for it. So that is also an executive team task. And how can the KM team facilitate all of that? Well, on the Ask Before Reinventing, some of that's just usage tracking. So who's using and not using the system? Can we look across teams and say teams in this department are sharing a lot of knowledge or asking about a lot of knowledge, teams in that department are not. So who's participating? We'll talk more about actual metrics for that in a minute, but that's the general idea. On dissemination, that also should be relatively easy to say which projects are talking about what they did, who's presenting to colleagues, and which projects are kind of black holes. So we know a lot of knowledge went in there, but not much came out. We perhaps want to talk to those project leaders and see, are they underselling themselves a little bit in terms of what was generated and what would be useful to others. And then the investing in priority knowledge, that's about the level of curation by topic. We'll look at that in a second as well in terms of metrics. And things like aging of content, are we up to date with what we're capturing and presenting to the team? And expertise finding as well. Do we have nominated people who are useful resources for learning more about these topics?
Hey, Simon, it's Bob. I wanted to apologize for, I had an issue with my mute button last time when you called on me, but I just wanted to maybe add one quick point on the executive thing before you get into the metrics.
Yeah.
The key theme that we've learned and I've always tried to think through is that this is ultimately about key executives walking the talk and serving as role models against these key themes. And one of the classic examples of this was at General Electric when Jack Welch was the CEO there. One of the things he was legendary for doing was that when business leaders would come in for the quarterly business reviews with him and talk about all the great things that they were doing and talking about their performance, the one question he asked everybody was, who did you share that with? And when he got lots of dumb stares the first few times through, it immediately set the tone for the people the next level down that you need to be proactively disseminating and thinking about what you've done for others. And that leadership role modeling is so important. And obviously these metrics that we'll talk about here in a second are really support that. But I just did want to emphasize that theme.
Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect example, Bob. And I'm sure that behavior also encouraged people to ask as well as giving. So just through knowing that was important to Mr. Welsh. So thank you for that. Let me do this next slide and then I'll pause for next couple of slides and I'll pause for questions again, Zakia. Some diagnostic analyses for these. The left-hand one is a user concentration chart. So in this case, we're doing downloads. It could be site visits or whatever makes sense in your knowledge management system. But what percentage of downloads are by, or of usage of the system is by what percentage of people? How concentrated is your usage? And interesting thing here is splitting this. We could split this in lots of ways, but one interesting split here is junior staff versus senior staff. And I've periodically suffered from the situation where junior staff are heavy users of a knowledge system, but senior staff are not, or at least there are a few enthusiasts, but it's very patchy. So in other words, everybody's delegating use of knowledge management to the newbies. And that may be a good thing, depending how you're organized. It may be the most efficient way to do it, but I think it's a danger sign, because if senior people are really not using the system at all, then they may not be aware of the true value of it or the true amount of time it saves. So I think it's worth, in a way, it's worth more to evangelize the system and the capability to a few senior people than maybe to a lot of junior people. Or at least you need to balance those two out when you're thinking about communication and training. Because the value of a number of senior evangelists spread around the organization across departments and locations is very, very high for maintaining enthusiasm on knowledge management. Left-hand one is more geographical or functional, so just different levels of usage in this case, and this is normalized for size of unit. Different levels of usage across different organizational and functional units, and we've arrayed it here by size of unit. So in this case, it's the moderate-sized departmental units or offices that are making the most use of the system. And that again could be a good thing because they're the folks who may not have the full staff structure. They may not have experienced people there, so that's why they're using it a lot. But it may be a concern as well if it varies so much across organizational units. Maybe some have had better training than others, some have better leadership than others, or the message is just getting through better in some places and some departments than others. So it's almost back to the river chart because it's a best practices thing again. You can learn from those that don't do it well and try to make this a bit more equalized. Then the other thing we talked about in terms of curation and freshness, so just this kind of table, and there's probably a more elegant way of displaying this, but looking at the total documents you have under different topic categories in your knowledge system. How old are they since they were last modified? And how's that changing over time? Are they getting older or are they getting newer? And then highlighted documents. So we're talking about best bets or things that are highlighted as being especially useful for maybe newcomers to the topic. What percentage of the total are those? And how old are they? And how is that changing over time? And then finally, there's a qualitative side to this, obviously, as well. So the kind of survey questions that get at the issues we were discussing just now. So when you last started a project, did you in fact look for people who might have done something similar before, and how did you find them? Does your manager encourage you to do that for each of the core topics you're most concerned about? How easy is it to find relevant and curated content? Who do you think has the good ideas and content that they're not fully sharing? And how quickly do you get an answer when you ask for help? So these kind of, and does your manager encourage you to share and disseminate? So these are things you could easily ask in an employee survey and would add power to these metrics that we just talked about from usage and curation. Let me pause there again. Any further comments, Bob, or any questions on these themes, Zakia?
I don't at all.
This is what I had to say really about executive leadership and promoting executive leadership and the role of the KM team in doing that. So we'll move now more onto the plumbing side of things. Anything you want to add, Zakia?
Not at this time, Simon. I do have some questions, but I think that they would be better held until the end, so we'll keep going and then move on to those.
Very good. So let's do the same thing with the KM team and their operational management of the system. And three things we identified there amongst many we could have identified, but these three have struck me as particularly important in managing these programs. First one is getting really comprehensive capture of what we call potential knowledge, and this just means a basic record of all activities, and that this is really getting you at who's done what in the past that you might be able to learn from. So it's almost a basic expertise locator or an activity locator. We're not talking here about detailed knowledge capture. We're talking about a basic record of what's been done where, so you know where to dig or where to contact people to find out more. And in our experience, this is sometimes neglected. People are sometimes very good at capturing more curated knowledge in selective areas that matter to the business, and that is very important, as we just discussed. But having this extra layer at the lower level, if you like, or the higher level of granularity of what's going on where, and where might there be potential knowledge that we haven't gathered and curated yet. We feel that's pretty important. Secondly, once you have content in your system, managing that for findability and kind of thinking of that under the KM hygiene banner of all the things in terms of tagging and promoting and lifecycle management of knowledge content, all very important, because if people can't find it, it's not going to get used and it won't have the value. And if they do find it, they want it to be up to date and relevant to them. So both of those aspects are highly important in terms of content management. And then finally, and related to that, is usable search and navigation. So a robust enough enterprise search capability that you can find what you need without training. It's really not sustainable to have a model that requires a lot of training, because you might be able to do that on a one-off basis, but you'll find it hard to sustain that over time. So, and these days the tools are usually good enough that if it's a well-designed interface, you can pick up how to use it and get value out of it very quickly. So analytical support for this, back to the black holes in a way, where are the places in the organization, again, locations, departments, even project teams or levels of the organization, where are the black holes where we're not aware of what's happening, we're not aware of the potential knowledge that might be generated, and how can we fix that? And this could be to do with just hooking into back-end systems like finance and marketing and HR to learn more about activities, or it could be very simple survey-based collection. But either way, there needs to be some way of getting an overall picture of different types of activity which might yield useful knowledge. And then on managing content for findability, this is about taxonomy and metadata and gap analysis of that. So content with too few tags, or tags with too little content, missing topic relationships, missing synonyms or acronyms that lead to incomplete results. So there could be a number of things there that are just lacking in the classification and findability area, that by improving those you could have a big impact on the value that people get out of the system and the relevance of results. And then on the front-end usability area, using search quality metrics and logs could be very valuable there, in seeing how many people are abandoning searches halfway through, how many queries are giving 0 results, what are the top queries and the things people are most interested in, and are we tagging those and highlighting those appropriately. So there's a lot of responsive work you could do there in looking at that data and tweaking the system to make it more useful for the primary use cases. Again, looking at some kinds of analysis for that. The left-hand one's the contribution chart. So again, some normalized measure of knowledge contributions here relative to activities that are going on, and arraying that across organizational units. There's no x-axis here except for just arraying them by magnitude. But the colors on this chart indicate offices or functional areas that are doing something different, and the yellow ones doing something different and having good results. The green ones are all doing something different with variable results, but looking at who's doing what and what are the results in terms of contribution, almost just like you would for any business problem, getting into that level of analysis could be very helpful. And just looking at what distinguishes the leaders, what are they doing that's different? And then similar to the chart we looked at before on life cycle, this one's about taxonomy and saying how many of our documents seem to be under tagged. They don't have, they have 1 or 2 taxonomy terms, but no more than that. How's that changing? And then how many terms are there with less than 5 documents tagged? So are those terms just cluttering up the taxonomy and not very useful? Could we streamline the taxonomy to make it more user-friendly? And like with the executive level, there are surveys that could be done here to help the KM team. So how could you make basic KM capture easier? And how could that be made easier for you as a user? Do you feel it's sufficiently valued what you do to put content into a KM system, or how could that be improved? How often do you use informal channels rather than enterprise search or communities? So are you actually going around the system, and if so, why? When you search, what % of the time do you find what you need? So how accurate is the search engine? How good is the findability? And similarly, what do you think about the relevance ranking of the results? Again, I'll pause there for comment or for questions.
Simon, I think we should carry on. We've got a lot of great questions coming in, but I think we've got a way that we can kind of group them together. So why don't you go ahead, and then we'll get to them. Okay,
well, we can just finish off now, because we really looked at the top, managing up and managing down, and I think the bottom line of all this is, as with any business performance issue, not just knowledge but anything, the way to attack it is to diagnose gaps, to understand root causes, to develop fixes, and then to do the enhancements in the implementation. So in this particular case, we've said that the solutions checklist would definitely include leadership and role modeling, the Jack Welch example and others like it. It would definitely include content strategy. So how are we gathering content efficiently, and are we making it easy to find? And it would definitely include process and infrastructure. So do we have a machine working that's going to keep working in terms of letting us know who's doing what around the organization and gathering the strategic content from those who can provide it? So more specifically, there might be a lot of action areas, and we just threw out some examples here. So perhaps you have the CEO and the executive team do some outreach on the business value proposition, and certainly role modeling, like you heard in the Welch example. I found inter-department league tables very powerful here, of who's contributing the most relative to their activity and who's contributing the least. You have to be a little sensitive, of course, depending on your organizational culture, but in general, competition works really well here. If you can find a diplomatic way of presenting it, competition works really well to encourage people to do better in the lower levels of the league. Auto classification, content discovery pilots for content management, seeding of knowledge forums and communities to make them work better. So getting them started, kicking them off with good ideas, and trying to encourage key participants to keep the flow running. Balanced scorecard metrics, a bit like the league tables. Enterprise search integration across repositories and expert finding. Portfolio process for the content. So what content are we gathering, and how does that match with the business strategy and the business needs? And finally, a renewed focus on governance and roles, and capture design as a particular role within that is always valuable. We could go on about these, and perhaps we will in the questions. So closing thoughts on this. Number one is really do try to take the CEO's view, or the senior leadership team's view. Treat this like a business problem that needs diagnostics, recommendations, and a business case. Secondly, really dig deep here analytically to find the key issues and the root causes. And we've talked about slicing and dicing that usage and contribution data to try to find what's really going on between the best and the worst across your organization. How can the worst learn from the best, essentially? How can you facilitate and prime the pump on that? And then really address those issues head on, mobilizing both the leaders and the implementers to get it done. And if all this happens right, I believe that KM can really be a catalyst for improved organizational effectiveness more generally, because all of these things we've talked about here are good things in any case for an organization to be doing. It's good to have executives taking active leadership in behavior of teams. It's good to be continually analyzing what could be done better across the organization, and of course it's good to take action on things that need to happen. So this has wider benefits than just KM as well. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it was helpful, and we have 10 minutes left for some questions.
Yes, very good, Simon. Thank you so much. So we've had a number of questions that have come through, so I'll get started on those. The first question is, what are some factors that you have seen that have caused a KM program to fail?
I think they're the same things we talked about in the presentation largely. I have to say I haven't seen many outright failures. I know there were those in the Google results, but in my experience it's more a question of disappointment rather than failure. It's things not reaching the achievement level that they could do, or things losing momentum. And I think this presentation really tried to address that. It's often a lack of sustained senior leadership support and buy-in. And sometimes it's a breakdown of the operations areas, and the kind of things there are the things we looked at on those last few charts, like a whole area of the world or a whole area of the organization doesn't contribute, and that kind of can become infectious if you're not careful, or the curation is really poor in one or two topic areas, and that also can become infectious if you don't get a handle on it. So I would say those two things, lack of top buy-in and leadership, and failure to notice when things are going wrong in selected areas and might spread.
Hey Simon, it's Bob. I might just add, I mean, there's probably a couple of higher level things that go wrong frequently that actually I think our conversation here was maybe assuming that some of these other things were on track to begin with. But you know, one of the common pitfalls in some organizations is the over-reliance on technology, and you know, spending primary effort just focusing on tools and technology as opposed to thinking about their role as business enablers. I think the talk here is sort of assuming that you haven't gotten sidetracked that way, but that's one of the common things. I think the other thing that we've seen a lot of is organizations get obsessed about focusing on the stockpile of knowledge as opposed to the flow and usage and impact of knowledge in everyday work. And I think that's another thing, again, in terms of orientation and design of the program that certainly I've seen as being common challenges with people when they set these things up.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I agree with both. And you're right, we did sort of assume here that the technology is generally under control, although we made those points at the end about improving it. But yeah, we're assuming here that technology is kind of in hand, but that's perhaps a dangerous assumption. So thank you for that.
Very good. Thank you for that. So we talked a lot about senior leadership and how important it is for them to be behind your program. For programs that have been in place for a while, how important is it for those leaders who are supportive of the efforts to be vocal about it to those who aren't?
Yeah, very important, I think, and that's yeah, that's really that's a good question actually, because we didn't talk too much about broad-based communication. We were focusing more on the communication within teams, which is also very important. But I think the questioner makes a great point there that we could add to this presentation the role of broad-based communication and continually renewing that. I think it's very common to have a big roadshow when you start a new program, or maybe when you do a major update, and senior leaders can and should be heavily involved in that. But I think it's equally important, like you're implying, to find ways of continuing that over time. So one example of that is just success stories. So when you share a new client win, perhaps when you've sold a bunch of new business, whether you're in a product or a service business, there's often a way of communicating that across the organization, and equally there's often a story in there about how knowledge management of some kind helped with that win. So finding those good examples and good stories and communicating them in a compelling way is a great way to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is, can you provide some practical tips for improving usage and knowledge adoption?
Well, I think part of it is, actually I think a lot of it is that leadership behavior stuff we were talking about. So actually trying to encourage senior leaders right down to team leaders to continually ask these questions that we were talking about. Did you look on the system? Did you ask somebody? Did you find out how someone else had done it? And then did you tell other people how you did it? Did you tell other people what you learned? So I think a very large part of that is ongoing behavioral encouragement from leaders and managers right down to team leader level. So in a way, it's like any behavioral change in an organization. If you're trying to get people to be more collaborative, or you're trying to get people to be more respectful, or you're trying to improve communication, you're going to use similar kinds of channels where you try to do it top down, and you also try to do it through training, and bottom up means like that, where we are more training the junior folks and the people coming into the organization and how you want things done. So I'd say it's a combination of the formal and the informal. So the formal is the training and orientation, especially to new folks, and the less formal but still critical is the top-down behavioral communication and walking the talk. Hope that answers the question.
I think it definitely does. I'll move on to the next question. So this is an organization, they already have a KM function set up so that so when new impacts of any new knowledge or content improvement are created, they can't be seen or they can't be seen separately from projects that have already been started or they're part of regular business. How do you call out the differences that have been made by their KM program or their KM function?
I think that's back to success stories, isn't it? Because even if it's if I'm understanding the question right, even if it's an ongoing function, you hopefully are generating a continual stream of success stories based on it, and those should be communicable and should be good advertising for the system. And then the other thing I think would be the sheer amount of dissemination activity that's going on. That would be another good index. So number one, how much are people contributing in terms of carefully curated knowledge about lessons learned and value to other teams? And then secondly, how active is the community structure, either virtual or live, community sharing, seminars, presentations, this kind of thing. How active is the communication culture, and how many meetings and discussions, either virtual or real, do we have to share knowledge? Do you think that answers the question, Zakia, or did I miss that?
No, I do. I think that was a very good suggestions that you provided. Bob, do you have anything you want to add, or do we want to move on?
I'd say try to take another question. That was a good answer.
Okay. Okay, very good. So do you have any suggestions or anything to add about assessing the quality, usability, or usability of materials such as lessons learned into the system?
I think it's those things we talked about on the slides. It's the qualitative survey stuff, which is very helpful on this. And you could even do ratings of documents within a knowledge system, and some people have had good success with that. The downside of it, I think, is that sometimes the rating is dependent on the use case, and something may be poorly rated just because it didn't fit my particular use case, but it may be very helpful for others. So that's why I'm a little nervous about online ratings, but I know some people do like them, so it's probably worth experimenting with. But in general, I think qualitative surveys of the kind we talked about towards the end of the presentation are a very good tool for that. And also the quantitative stuff in terms of, not so much in terms of quality, but in terms of findability, so abandoned searches and zero-hit searches and so on. That's a good thing to do first, just to see if there are any fundamental findability issues before you even get into the quality side of things. But on quality, I would say surveys and potentially experimenting with ratings, but treating that with caution, depending how similar your use cases are for your knowledge system.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so our next question is, in a matrix system where you have multiple operational leaders and functional leaders and multiple implementations, how do you ensure good KM to avoid duplicity of tasks already done, therefore reinventing the wheel?
Well, that's a really good one, matrix organizations, and that's a governance question largely, I think, and I've lived through that one, so I sympathize with the questioner. It's not an easy one. I think the way to attack it, or one way to attack it, is through the organizational taxonomy that you set up, which has, where you try to set up something that, say it's a regional versus a functional, or a product versus a functional organization. Perhaps that's the best matrix example, where you have product lines, but then you have a matrix of functional departments crossing over those. So one way to attack that is to design the taxonomy very carefully to have non-overlapping categories there. So you have a product view of the organization and classification of knowledge underneath that, which is product-specific knowledge. And then you have a functional view, which is the functional specific knowledge in HR or finance or operations or whatever it is. And you design that to make it mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive, you know, the MISI rule there. And then you design the governance around that. So you think about knowledge capture and curation within those lines. And if you've set things up right, they shouldn't overlap too much. They may overlap in some areas, in which case there's no substitute there for just like a committee approach where you get people together periodically to see what the overlaps are and to align responsibility, or to delegate responsibility to one side or the other. But that's my basic approach to that. It is a challenge, and I think the only way to attack it is to try to do it systematically by saying who's responsible for what and where there are overlaps, addressing them explicitly.
Okay, thank you for that answer. We're over time, and I'm going to end on this one last question, and then we'll close out. And any questions that we hadn't gotten to online, I'll be sure that we get you guys an answer and follow up. So last question is, do you have any information on knowledge sharing incentive programs that work well with a federal government agency? If so, please describe.
Not specifically with federal, I don't think, unless Bob contributes to that one, but I can talk about incentives more generally, and I don't see why it wouldn't apply to federal as well as to anything else. In our experience, direct financial incentives are a little dangerous in this area. They can motivate quantity rather than quality, unless they're very carefully managed, and they generally kind of tend to go against the whole collaborative ethos we're trying to promote here. So the way we generally prefer it when we're running or setting up programs is a more recognition and example-based incentive system. The value of recognition for people is very powerful, of just being patted on the back for contributing an important piece of knowledge that contributed to an important initiative or an important organizational success. So in the federal sector, we're not talking about business success, but we're talking about success with initiatives or programs. And to the extent that somebody really contributed something important that helped with that, then give them the public pat on the back and communicate that broadly and keep doing that with examples over time. We think that's the most powerful incentive and the one that's most consistent with quality knowledge gathering. Anything to add, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, in addition to everything you said, you know, recognition in all of its forms is central to making a program stick in any organization. And you know, the U.S. Army and other government agencies that have been quite successful utilize that, just like any other private or public organization. I think also the broader cultural element of trying to get this right is to reinforce the whole notion that knowledge sharing and also seeking out and finding the best other knowledge to help inform your work is something that needs to be embedded in everyday thinking and the DNA of how people work. And those more kind of cultural norms need to get reinforced in any organization, no matter where they are, and that can be done through many mechanisms that involve lots of ways to reinforce that behavior in terms of coaching, mentoring, performance management, leadership examples, and so forth. And that's all applies to federal just like it does anyplace else.
Oh, you made a good point at the end there, Bob, about performance management. I forgot to mention that. So it goes along with recognition, really, but it could be included in your performance management system too, that you have a specific criterion for knowledge contributed and knowledge used as well, if you feel comfortable doing that. So as part of an annual review or a quarterly review, how well is this person leveraging the knowledge of the rest of the organization and contributing to it? So that's a very powerful one too. So sorry I forgot that, but that's a great one.
Yeah, I think all great insights. So guys, Simon and Bob, I thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And everyone still left on the line, we thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you guys next month on our next call. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.